Muslims can't be racist. It's against Islam. Christians don't see colour. All lives matter equally. Buddhists are all peaceful, as per the teachings of Gautama Buddha. If religions preach unity through shared humanity, then why are some people of faith so hostile towards those who are different to them? Why is prejudice pervasive in places of worship, places of peace? Surely there shouldn't be any room for racism here. Hello everyone, and welcome to The Shift with Maryyum. I'm Maryyum Mahmood, bringing you a new and informative video every Wednesday. Today's topic, if you haven't gathered already, is religion and racism. So, what is racism? How do we define it? Racism is prejudice, discrimination, treating an individual or group less favourably, and premising this negative treatment on this notion that they are somehow different and thereby lesser because of their ethnicity or perceived ethnicity, or markers and characteristics attributed to them or aspects of their identity. Such animosity and antagonism embeds a certain negative stereotype regarding individuals and groups, and this leads to hostile feelings against them, which can further stigma against marginalized people. Strictly speaking, there is no such thing as race. It's a social construct, meaning it's made up. It's not permanent, it's not consistent, nor is it logical or objective. What people tend to do is conflate race with ethnicity and assign racial categories to individuals and groups based on characteristics commonly attributed to them. Do you see how this can lead to stereotyping? So racism isn't just about skin color or biological phenotypes or physical characteristics, but also markers associated with certain elements of one's identity or how they might express it. Now, coming to religion, or ways of life which instill our daily lives with beliefs and guiding principles that shape our norms, our values, enrich our cultures and traditions by way in which we express ourselves. As you can imagine, an awful lot goes into preserving these ways of life, which are considered sacred and divine. So inevitably, there will be a certain hesitance or reluctance to question things openly. But we need to be clear. Discussing how we interpret or practice our respective faiths shouldn't be denounced. How else are we expected to learn and grow? Obviously, not everyone who practices the same faith looks similar to one another, but religious people are often racialized by wider society. Whether it's Muslim women who wear a headscarf, hijab, or Sikh men who wear a turban, markers of their religious identity take on the form of a racial category. What's often left unsaid, however, is the reality of racism within religious groups. Now, some people still consider themselves as standard bearers or gatekeepers of their religious community. That's where an acute problem resides. Such thinking leads to a sense of entitlement, ownership over that faith, which is wrong, but unfortunately it's all too common. So much so that it rarely gets spoken about when we refute racism. In theory, major world religions preach equality in the eyes of God, egalitarianism amongst people. Looking specifically at the three Abrahamic faiths, Islam, Christianity, and Judaism, it's pretty clear from scriptures that there is no place for racism. For example, chapter 49, verse 13 of the Holy Quran states, "O humankind, indeed we have created you from male and female, and made you into peoples and tribes, so that you may know one another. Indeed, the most noble of you in the eyes of Allah is the most righteous." And from the Bible, Deuteronomy 10:17-19, "For the Lord your God is the God of gods, and the Lord of lords, who shows no partiality and accepts no bribes. He defends the cause of the fatherless and the widow, and loves the foreigner residing among you, giving them food and clothing. And you are to love those who are foreigners, for you yourself were foreigners in Egypt. And of course, from Judaism, the third book of the Torah, Leviticus 19:18, it states, "Love your neighbor as you love yourself." So, all of this is so beautiful and inspiring, yet there is a massive disconnect from reality. When we look at depictions of deities and portrayals of saints and sages, what do we see? One need only look at the mainstream, global, Western appearance of Jesus as a white man. And similarly, the way in which his mother, Mary, is depicted. Both are very white. But around the world, churches have depicted Madonna and Child in the image of their congregants, so that they look just like the people in prayer. Whether it's churches in Africa or South Korea or even India, the point is realizing and honoring this difference and celebrating what Jesus means to his followers around the world. Now, looking specifically at the Islamic faith, Shia Islam is known for its illustrious iconography. So we have imagery of holy figures such as the Prophet, peace be upon him, his family, the Ahlul Bayt, blessings be upon them. And again, what do we see? Imagery of white men. So the masculinity I shall save for a future episode and shan't digress. Interestingly, there are very few depictions of the Ahlul Bayt as non-white people. However, newer and more upcoming artists are reclaiming this and depicting the Ahlul Bayt in their own work, in their own art. So what's really interesting, and a question that comes to mind, is why are these mainstream depictions of deities and saints and holy figures whitewashed? Is it a superiority complex? Now, many will turn to colonialism and seek solace and reassurance in the idea that this is just another monstrous remnant of a bygone colonial era. Granted, empire further entrenched and exacerbated this glorification of whiteness, but favouring white over non-white predates colonialism. When it comes to faith, a lot of it has to do with the terminology that we choose to use. Let's take a moment to think about the ways in which celestial beings, angels, and the people of heaven are often depicted. For one, their skin is frightfully pale, luminous, almost transparent. That's the crux of the issue. It comes down to the very interpretations of texts that we use to describe the embodiment of heavenly beings. In Islam, for instance, they are described as having nur emanating from their faces. This basically means a heavenly glow. What it doesn't mean is being white. But for as long as we can remember, people have deemed nur as interchangeable with white or fair-skinned. With regards to the depiction of celestial beings in Christianity, one immediately thinks of the glorious paintings on the ceilings of the Vatican. The association of colours is key. White is angelic, black is demonic, and thus whiteness becomes further entrenched as an aspiration of heavenly beauty, divinity. And this really matters. If we look at historical figures within the Abrahamic faiths, for instance, key followers and disciples of both Jesus and Muhammad, peace be upon them, they were actually quite diverse. Although many paintings and artwork depict white disciples, many were dark-skinned. Barnabas, Simeon, and Saul amongst them. And when it comes to Islam, there is this strange defense mechanism against racism or accusations of such. Immediately, the conversation is struck down with, Bilal was black. In doing so, sadly, many of us forget that a lot of the Prophet's followers were diverse. Many of the early followers were actually black. Ayman, her children, Lubayna, and Sumayya bint Khabat. But let's rewind a little. When modern day Muslims trace the Prophet, peace be upon him's lineage back to Abraham, it's done through Ismail, who is the son of Hajar, a black woman. And it's every year that hundreds of thousands of Muslims around the world come to pilgrimage in the Holy Land of Mecca and Medina and retrace the steps of Hajar, retrace her journey. How beautiful is that? If only we reflect. The awful scourge of racism seeps into our daily practices. It's an awful irony that the migrant workers, people of colour, both brown and black, are so mistreated, almost abused, in the Holy Land itself. Just because of the colour of their skin, they're denigrated and disrespected. And this fate isn't restricted to Muslims of colour. Think also of Ethiopian Jews who are trying so hard, desperately, to end the stigma around the colour of their skin, to be considered and deemed equal as Jews within their community of faith. Now, if we contrast this with the way in which religious people treat converts, there is an evident hierarchy here. To be clear, in Islam, the faith that I practice, all Muslim converts or reverts have their own fair share of obstacles and challenges to overcome. But how converts or reverts are treated, there's an obvious privilege afforded to those of white heritage or converts of a lighter skin tone, and this reality can't be denied or overlooked. Those from non-white backgrounds just aren't given that level of admiration. The irony is, most of us who are born Muslim today are actually descendants of non-white converts to Islam. Thinking broadly amongst the global diaspora of Muslims, there's this common misconception that present-day black Muslims in the US and UK are always first-generation reverts to Islam, and that's not the case. This once again reinforces the idea that Islam belongs to Arabs or South Asians. For the record, Black Americans and Europeans belonging to countries like France were the first people to establish mosques and Muslim community centres in their respective nations. Now, the issue of racism isn't exclusive to Muslims, but as a practicing Muslim, I will focus on my own faith first. However, I do realise that in some religions, particularly some denominations of specific faiths, they don't accept that you can be a convert and enter the faith at all. In fact, one must be born into the faith according to some doctrines. The sad reality is that while we continue to sideline black people of faith, they experience by far the worst forms of intersectional anti-black racism, whether that's black Muslims facing the brunt of Islamophobia or black Jews at the receiving end of anti-Semitism. When discussing forms of religious hatred, it is imperative that we take this into account, that our siblings in faith are vilified on many fronts and face multi-level racism. So when they choose to speak out against one form of racism, often what happens is the other aspect of their identity is sidelined or downplayed, and that shouldn't be the case. So, just because our faiths preach unity and denounce racism, it doesn't mean that we, the people who practice these faiths, can't be racist. This is just an easy way to absolve ourselves from having important conversations and tackling racism not just in wider society, but right here in our own homes, our own communities, and places of worship. Finally, I implore people of faith who form the majority ethnic group in their congregation to stop self-centering when it comes to racism. Being inclusive doesn't mean having different looking Muslims, Jews, or Christians. That's just tokenism. It's not going to change the very structures that require dismantling. All that I've mentioned in this video, the skewed interpretations associating all goodness with whiteness, that's the issue. It's worth reflecting upon, lest we replicate it instead of rectifying it in our own social spheres. Ultimately, if we pride ourselves on inculcating inclusivity in wider society, Let's ensure that we foster social harmony in our very own faith spaces. Let that be a testament to all that we believe in. May we practice what we preach. And finally, remember that race doesn't determine religion. And no ethnic group is the custodian of a faith. And no one is absolved of racism simply because they are an adherent of a faith that at its core is anti-racist. If you enjoyed watching this video, like, comment and share, and make sure to subscribe to my channel. Join me again next Wednesday for a brand new video right here exclusively on The Shift with Maryyum. Thanks for watching.